Calling to order the Public Infrastructure and Utilities Committee meeting of Wednesday, May 15th, 2024 at 3:30 p.m. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Alderman Farmer. Alderwoman Keys. Alderwoman Velazquez. Vice Chair Browning.
Present.
Chair Schweitzer.
Present.
Alderwoman Keys. Alderwoman Velazquez. We have 3 present. We have a quorum.
Thank you. A quorum being present, we will move on to the approval of the minutes. I will entertain a motion to approve the minutes of Thursday, May 9th, 2024. Madam Clerk, it's been moved by the Alderman from the 5th, seconded by the Alderman from the 9th. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Alderman Farmer. Aye. Alderwoman Keys. Alderwoman Velazquez. Vice Chair Browning.
Aye.
Chair Schweitzer.
Present.
Alderwoman Keys. Alderwoman Velazquez. We have 3 aye votes.
Alderman Velazquez, I heard chime in there. Alderwoman?
Yes, was that a present or a, I'm sorry, was that
We're
roll?
voting on the minutes right now. You're not driving, are you?
Oh, no, I'm stopped.
Okay. No
aye.
participating in meetings at all while driving. So just making sure that
Okay.
that's known. It's part of our rules.
Yes.
Awesome. Okay. Thank you very much. Madam Clerk, please note that she voted aye on the minute.
So noted.
Okay. Thank you. With that, we have approved the minutes of Thursday, May 9th, 2024. And we will move on. We have no board bills to review and no resolutions for review. Today's committee meeting is entirely devoted to hearing about the City of St. Louis Transportation and Mobility Plan. We have members of the St. Louis City team working on that, as well as the consultants who were brought on to really lead the project through to fruition. And to kick us off today, I'll have Scott Ogilvie come up and please get started as you're ready. Thank you for being here, Mr. Ogilvie. It has to turn green and then it's on.
How about now?
Thank you.
Well, thank you. So my name is Scott Ogilvie. I work for the city's Planning and Urban Design Agency. My position is called Program Manager for Complete Streets. And I want to thank you for the invitation to come before the Public Infrastructure and Utilities Committee today. And I am happy to be here and to provide an introduction and an overview of the Transportation and Mobility Plan. This will be our first time here, first introduction to the project, but we plan and expect to come back and to offer many additional opportunities for engagement with members of the Board of Aldermen. So I want to thank the Mayor's Office and the Board of Aldermen for funding this initiative, which I think is such an important opportunity for the City of St. Louis. Why is this so important? Because today we do not have a transportation plan that covers the entire city, and it has been decades since we've had such a plan. Of course, that makes us a little unusual in 2024. Cities tend to have transportation plans that provide a guide for local policy and investment. So I'm very appreciative that with this project we can move in that direction. So what will St. Louis's Transportation and Mobility Plan be? So the shorthand I use to describe it, this process, is to establish the shared consensus vision, values, and goals for transportation and mobility in our city. It will provide a guide built on clearly articulated values for priority transportation projects and policies, and future decision making. So this involves talking to our residents, to city leadership, to city staff, to elected officials, and to listening to the expertise of our consultant team. And City of St. Louis, listening to the expertise of that our consultant team brings. The City of St. Louis and our partner agencies currently have many very exciting transportation projects funded, which are being built now and in the coming years, some of which the mayor highlighted at her State of the City speech last night. Many of these are project types we may not have considered a decade ago, which center safety, quality of life, and multimodal transportation options for residents. And we are learning a lot from each of these projects, and the TMP will help us plan the next series of projects, adding to what we're doing and identifying areas where we will still have needs for new infrastructure. But the TMP is not just about projects. It's also an opportunity for us to assess our own policy, ordinances, and practices as they relate to transportation and mobility, and have a chance to have a deep dialogue with partner agencies like MoDOT, Bi-State, Great Rivers Greenway, and East West Gateway, who are all building, operating, or funding transportation projects in St. Louis. It's also an opportunity for us to build tools to better communicate to the public our priorities, projects, and values, something I know we're all interested in. As you may remember, this project was funded last year in Board Bill 120. After funding became available, we undertook a competitive selection process led by BPS, which resulted in the selection of a consultant team led by Crawford, Murray, and Tilley, also known as CMT, and I call them the other CMT in St. Louis. With additional partners on the team, including Smith Group, PGAV, SWT Landscape Design, CDI, and Vector Communications. This team includes people and firms who have extensive experience delivering both plans and projects in the city of St. Louis, but also brings national context and perspective and experience working in peer cities across the country. Many of the team members are here today, either in person or remotely. In person, maybe they can raise their hands as I say their names, are Jackie Knight, Brian Eads, Sophia Roth, Daniel Arias, all with CMT, with Smith Group, Janet Atarian, with PGAV, Catherine Homaker, and I believe remotely, we have Allie Fields, also with CMT. Maybe chime in, see if we can hear you.
Hi there.
Thank you, Allie. Hello. Brianna Coleman with SWT.
Good afternoon.
Hi, Brianna. And Jeremy Lindley with CDI.
Hello.
Hi, Jeremy. And on the city side, our project management and project direction includes a core group of people and departments routinely working on transportation in St. Louis, including myself in planning, the Board of Public Service, the Streets Department, the Office of the Disabled, and the Mayor's Office. And of course, we are talking to many staff members across all those departments as a component of this project. Now I will let Jackie Knight, who is the project manager with CMT, take you through a more detailed project introduction and overview. Thank you.
Thanks, Scott. Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having us here today to talk about the Transportation and Mobility Plan. As Scott said, my name's Jackie Knight. I'm the project manager. I'm also a South St. Louis City resident, so super excited about what this plan means for the city of St. Louis. Next slide, please. We can actually go to right there, yeah. So we wanted to start talking about why the Transportation and Mobility Plan and why this is important for the city, and kind of back it up to how we got here today. Now, Scott did a fabulous introduction already, so we'll try to breeze through some of the points. But as you know, in Board Bill 120, the mayor allocated $40 million in ARPA funding for roadway safety improvements and thinking about ways that we can enhance roadway safety in the city of St. Louis. $1.25 million of that allocated funding is for this Transportation and Mobility Plan. As Scott mentioned, the city of St. Louis is very unique in the fact that currently we do not have a holistic plan that focuses on the entire city, which is fairly unusual for major metropolitan cities and peer cities across the U.S. The Transportation and Mobility Plan also gives us an opportunity to look at all of the significant planning efforts that we have going in the city that are also regionally significant. Everything that Great Rivers Greenway is doing with the Brickline Greenway and how transformative that project has to be, connecting east and west and north and south. Also the Future 64 Planning and Environmental Linkages Study that the Missouri Department of Transportation Transportation is doing right now along I-64 in the Central Corridor. And then, of course, we're all familiar with the MetroLink Green Line expansion. So these are all really big, transformative planning projects in various phases, from plan through construction. We already have some segments of the Brick Line complete. And the Transportation and Mobility Plan really gives us an opportunity to stitch together some of these transformative projects and then also set the values for vision and for the vision for infrastructure decision-making in the city. Next slide, please. If you want to go back. Yep, this is, so, no, that slide, thank you. So the TMP will give us an opportunity as the city to prioritize a safer and better maintained transportation network, and also really re-envision how people get around the city of St. Louis. The St. Louis region is a very car-centered region right now, and this plan gives us an opportunity to rethink how people have the choice to travel where they're going, choose the mode that they would like to use. On the slide here, you can see our project fact sheet. This will be published to our website, but it's a 2-pager that gives a pretty quick rundown of all of the task elements, the guiding planning principles, and then the timeline for the planning effort. Next slide. So the TMP is really about people and how can we make a better St. Louis for all people that live here, people that visit here. The TMP is going to give us an opportunity to establish a consensus around what mobility means to us. It's something that we have not done before, and you'll see in a few slides we have an extremely robust engagement plan to be able to understand how people want to travel, what mobility means to them, and then also align those goals with city staff and key partner agencies. It's also important to remember that safe mobility is a right, and no one should die or suffer a life-altering injury by simply walking on a sidewalk, going to the grocery store, etc., making routine trips. And so incorporating this idea of safety in the future of transportation in this. Our transportation system can also be sustainable and resilient. Where can we incorporate green design features, and how can we be equipped to respond to major events, but then also thinking about routine maintenance and operations, and making sure that the life cycle of our infrastructure is well taken care of. We also know that health outcomes are dramatically impacted by how people travel or even where they live next to major roadway features such as interstates. So how can our transportation system really support more positive health outcomes and healthier, more vibrant neighborhoods? We also know the TMP is going to give us an opportunity to focus on connectivity and accessibility. People should be able to easily connect to everyday goods and services, quality of life amenities. It should not be a burden to go to the pharmacy, for example, or walk their children to the park. We also know that accessibility is extremely important for disabled people and for elderly members of the St. Louis population. And then finally, the TMP offers us a chance to be visionary, yet focus on implementable strategies for achievable impacts. We have to think in the future. Transportation trends are rapidly evolving. Like Scott mentioned when he gave the intro, some of the projects that we're seeing coming online today are projects that we're thinking differently than we would have even 10 years ago. So thinking long-term, but also thinking about how we can make immediate impacts while the plan's being complete. Next slide, please. So I do want to share a little bit about what our team's guiding principles are. And we feel that these 4 principles are extremely important as we approach the TMP work. These are based on the work of our team members and also largely shaped around national best practices. Choice is an important thing to think about when we know that people want to be able to choose to get to where they are going. People don't necessarily want to feel like they have to own a car. People might not even be able to own or operate a car for various reasons. So people need to have reliable choices to get to everyday goods and services. Safety is another thing that has to be top of mind. St. Louis is not unique in the traffic violence crisis that we see playing out on our streets. It has spiked in all cities since the COVID-19 pandemic, and now is the time to think about how we can correct course and really address some of the traffic fatalities and serious injuries that we're seeing playing out on our streets. Equity is another key component. So acknowledging that past decisions have disproportionately harmed various members of our community, and thinking about how we can provide people with the resources they need to succeed in terms of connectivity and accessibility. And then finally, place. St. Louis is a great city, a lot of rich history, and we really need to focus on streets as public spaces and how we can build up our communities by redesigning streets with place in mind as opposed to a pass-through space for vehicles. Recognizing that streets do have a functionality for serving motor vehicle traffic, but how can we rethink the design of these spaces? So the desired outcomes is a unified vision for citywide mobility. We'll be developing prioritized, actionable projects for short, medium, and long term. Another thing that we're really excited about with this planning process is new tools to communicate values around infrastructure decision-making and project prioritization to the public, so more transparency around projects. And then finally, adoption by the TMP by the Planning Commission to the City of St. Louis Comprehensive Plan. Next slide. You can go to the next slide. So the TMP leadership, we have a core team. Scott Ogilvie is the City of St. Louis project manager. John Kohler is the BPS liaison. Jamie Wilson is the traffic commissioner. And then rounding out our core team that meets on a regular basis, we have David Newberger from the Office of the Disabled and Grace Kyung from the Mayor's Office. And then I am serving as the project manager from CMT. Next slide. A little bit more about our subconsultants. I know Scott introduced who was in the room and virtually on today. Smith Group, we have Janet here. They bring a national best practice lens. They're doing a lot of work around the Brickline Greenway in St. Louis, so we're super excited to have that connection. And they're a really key collaborator to CMT on this effort. So they'll be working on nearly all of the task items up with us, but leading the development of the typology design toolkit, working on the safety action plan, and then the best practice perspective on the policy and ordinance task. We also have SWT Design, a local landscape architect, a lot of significant experience in the city, so bringing that perspective too on maintenance and operations. Vector Communications is leading the engagement and community relations strategy. We have PGAV on the team, and Catherine's here today, local policy and planning experts, so helping us with the policy and ordinance task item. CBB is a local traffic engineering, transportation planning firm. They are leading the development of the East-West Gateway Regional Safety Action Plan, and so that's going to be critical as we develop the City of St. Louis Safety Action Plan. And then Jeremy is on virtually. He's helping with our data and asset management. He is also doing all of the data analysis, transparency portal for the East-West Gateway Safety Action Plan. So that's another good collaboration and synergy that we have moving into this project. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to get into the process and talk about the key task items as well as work that we have already completed to date. We just got notice to proceed on March 1st, and we've actually been able to accomplish a lot of our initial information gathering. So we have engagement, we have assets and benchmarking. We're going to be doing a safety action plan. We've got a policy and ordinance review, and then a street typology guide. And if you want to go to the next slide, I'll get into this information in a little more detail. So a bit about project management. The key takeaways I want to talk about here is the project schedule is 18 months from notice to proceed to completion. So anticipated completion is August 2025. Most of the work would be done by May 2025, but that gives us time to get the plan through the adoption process during the summer. Another key thing that we're doing in the project management task item, and we've already started digging into this, is a risk assessment. And so we've asked partners, we've asked city staff, we've asked our stakeholders about potential risks that could derail the planning process. And so we're going to be monitoring those risks throughout the life cycle of the plan and doing our best to mitigate those risks, whether that be extra meeting stakeholders or something else that we need to be a little bit more intentional about so that we're making sure the project stays on course, on time, and within budget. Next slide, please. So here's the timeline. Like I said, we got notice to proceed in March. In April, we started our assets and benchmarking task. We also started our policy and ordinance review task. We also had some visioning workshops with city staff. We just launched our website this week, which I'm happy to share in a few slides. We'll also be starting our safety action plan this month. In June, we're going to be kicking off our typology design. We've got a whole summer of 2024 programmed for engagement opportunities and input. In August, we'll actually be doing 4 dedicated open houses to the project. And then next spring, we've got more open houses planned. And then, of course, within that time frame, there'll be ongoing activities for input, coming to neighborhood meetings, local festivals, things like that. Like I said, the final plan in May 2025, and then plan adoption throughout the summer of 2025. Next slide, please. So the ongoing work, this is a complete list of everything that we've got going on right now. And so on the next few slides, I'm going to get into some more detail. Let's just go ahead and go to the next slide so I can start talking about that. So this is the cover page of our website, tmp-stl.com. It is live right now. On the website, you can stay up to date with everything that's going on in the process. Another thing I want to make sure I mention today is that we are also going to be having an advisory committee. Applications for the advisory committee are online right now. So anyone listening to the presentation, elected officials, share the word. We want to get as many applications as we can to work through our screening process and get that advisory committee set. Of course, we're looking for people who travel around St. Louis by different modes of transportation. Next slide, please. This is the draft of the East-West Gateway Safety Action Plan High Injury Network. So what you're seeing on here is corridors that have a higher percentage of fatalities and serious injuries. And then you can see on the pop-out a little bit about how you can sort the data. So sorting by, pedestrian fatality or bicycle fatalities. It's a pretty robust system for being able to sort. And so just wanted to highlight that because that's something that our team is already collaborating with the East-West Gateway team. Just really good synergy having CDI working on this, who developed this portal for the East-West Gateway plan. Next slide. And on here, you'll see some pictures from our city staff goals alignment workshop. We had approximately 50 people from about 10 different departments. We gave an informational presentation about the TMP, and then we had 3 interactive group exercises. One we called a mission map, where people shared more about their department's mission, and if they could wave a magic wand and change one thing about what they were doing or one thing about a program they were working on, what would that be specific to transportation and mobility? We also did a values exercise where we provided 12 values around transportation and mobility, such as safety, place, accessibility, maintenance. And groups had to decide of those values which 4 rose to the top as very important through a series of discussions. And then, like I mentioned earlier, we also did that risks, challenges, hopes, opportunities exercise. And so right now we're working on summarizing this from both our workshop with the city staff and our workshop with partner agencies to try to start elevating what are the values that we need to be making or including in our project prioritization. Next slide, please. So this is an example from Smith Group, actually, of street design values. And I wanted to show this as an idea of what we're trying to get to through that goals alignment session. But what are priorities for us when we're thinking about projects, infrastructure decisions? On this example, you can see complete neighborhoods, vibrant places. Like I said, we had a series of 12 terms, and we're working through a summary of all that data right now. Next slide. We've also completed 11 stakeholder interviews. We have 4 scheduled. These are one-on-one conversations with people. The key output of these is going to help us influence our survey design, and then also will feed into our engagement process. But just general questions about experiences traveling around St. Louis, specific streets even that people would like to see changed. Values, again, is a question we're asking everybody. We've got a focus group process underway, so we're working with a research firm for 4 of the focus groups. For the 5th focus group, we're working with David Newberger and his group that he has working on universal design, again, really with that accessibility focus for people with disabilities. And then finally, we've got that community advisory committee application online. Next slide. All right. So this is a full rundown of all the engagement components. And the ones that I did not highlight on here, I'm going to highlight in the next slide if you want to go to that. Because I thought you all would be interested on immediate ways to get involved. So like I said, the focus groups will be happening the end of May and June. This is through a research firm that's helping us populate these groups. We'll do a survey, both a statistically valid survey that will be administered through a research firm for the month of July, but then that same survey will be available at all of the community events and pop-ups and neighborhood meetings that we go to this summer. So other meetings that we have programmed for the summer is meeting with neighborhood improvement specialists to talk about the project, and then tabling at community events, neighborhood meetings, doing condensed versions of values exercises to really hear from the public about what they value when it comes to transportation. Next slide. August 2024, we have 4 open houses programmed. We'll be doing 8 pop-up demonstrations. Vector has an equity mapping tool that will enable us to ensure we're hearing from diverse voices within the community, and again, really being intentional about the people that we're talking to. And then other plan materials that we're developing throughout the process include handouts, a frequently asked questions document. We'll be developing social media posts, 3 videos, and then ongoing media relations. So a very robust engagement in community relations. So on the assets and benchmarking tasks, so now I'm going to go through each of the task item, just one slide to talk about these. But Jeremy and his team at CDI is leading this, and we're really going through this process of identifying and collecting what we have. We'll be doing some interviews with city staff and identifying gaps in data that we wish we had, or data that would make day-to-day operations easier. And then analyzing ways to incorporate that data as well as share that data out to the public. So then that's kind of the second half of the graphic that you see up there, defining best practices and processes for sharing the data, and then putting together some sort of transparency portal that the city of St. Louis can use. It's one thing that we've heard, people are confused about how to understand what projects are happening, where they might be able to find information about things. So this data assets and benchmarking task will really help us define what that is and what that looks like. We'll also be doing a safety action plan. So incorporating the safe systems approach. The key takeaway from the safe systems approach is that we're all humans, we're all vulnerable, we all make mistakes. We need to build a transportation system where a mistake is not life-altering or does not result in death. So we'll be building on East West Gateway's safety action plan. Their plan, like I showed that slide, has done a really wonderful job digging into a lot of the data and analyze what's going on with respect to roadway safety. Their plan is regional. So the city of St. Louis is just one area within their 8-county plan region. So we're really excited about this plan to be able to dig a little bit deeper into the layers and focus more on project prioritization, bring in a public health lens, and think about more socioeconomic factors in the built environment with an equity focus, and then also policy actions related to roadway safety. Next slide. Which gets us into the policy and ordinance review. But the idea of the policy and ordinance review is really focused on aligning policy and process for better project prioritization, which can result in a better network of multimodal transportation options. So this task is going to be, we're going to start with some interviews to understand existing policies, programming, informal programming from city staff, what's going on, how are we making decisions, what policies on the books are impacting the way that transportation decisions are happening, and scoring how those policies are currently working. And then we'll also be doing some national best practice research from peer cities, relying on other professional organization networks to understand where have policies been able to revamp some of the project prioritization and decision-making process, and how might we be able to apply the local context in St. Louis to bring in some of those best practices here. And then finally, on this task item, we'll be looking at staffing recommendations, and so what that looks like across the departments in terms of who's focused on various elements of some of these policy and processes. And then finally, it will be recommended policy actions, updates, potential new updates, and then a framework for implementation moving forward. And then the street typology guide is another component of the planning process. And the idea of here is really customizing typologies to meet St. Louis needs. So street typologies is thinking one step beyond roadway functional classification, which is traditionally how streets are designed when we think about how a street moves motor vehicles within a network of a transportation system. So thinking about access as well as mobility through places. The idea of a typology is to think outside of the curb to curb or the right of way and understand the local context. So how does land use play into what the street design should be? We'll be coordinating closely with the strategic land use plan team. So they're a little bit ahead of us in our planning process, which will work out nicely because when they have their draft future land use map, we'll be able to look at that as we start thinking of our network typology map. So we'll be doing some existing conditions analysis, defining what those typologies are, developing this living tool that's a guide built on consensus for prioritizing modes, elements within the street design, and then overlaying that with a network of where these streets are located. Next slide. And then finally, we have implementation. So this will be a new chapter of the comprehensive plan. And the idea from our team is really about aligning priorities and policies and funding. And once we can start to align all of that, we can improve mobility in the city. And there's one more slide on implementation. And so with all of the planning efforts that are going on in St. Louis, this slide really speaks to how the TMP fits into a quote-unquote comprehensive plan. So comprehensive plans traditionally have various chapters focused around specific subjects like land use or transportation or housing or economic development. And so St. Louis has these ongoing plans, as you can see up here. We're doing the TMP, the strategic land use plan is ongoing, the sustainability plan, and then all of these will be adopted as the new, more contemporary comprehensive plan for the city. And with that, I guess we'll have a bit of information about what's next, just so that you could understand what we're doing before we might come back and meet with elected officials. We'll have some of our initial mobility values identified. Like I mentioned, we've made it through the staff and the partner agencies workshop. We're nearly through the stakeholder interviews. We'll be complete with our focus groups. So we'll have a lot of data to share in terms of what people are saying are their values for transportation. We'll have our advisory committee formed. We'll have that statistically valid survey complete. Again, the survey will be open at the pop-ups and community events throughout the summer, but that statistically valid part that we're working through the research firm will be complete by July. And yeah, the focus groups and interviews complete. So lots of ongoing pieces, lots that we'll have to share with you next time. But thank you for letting us share today. My contact, Scott's contacts on the screen for any questions you might have.
Thank you so much for that presentation. It was very informative. I'm just excited this is happening. Before we move on to questions from the committee, do we have members of the public who wanted to make any comments? Okay. Alderman Vollmer, any questions? Alderman Browning?
Thank you, and really excited about all of this. We got a little preview a couple weeks ago, and I was excited then. I'm still excited now. I was wondering, in terms of deliverables for this project, what are some of the things that, I think we kind of had a broad overview just now, but what are some of the things that we might be able to point to as something that might come out of this project that would actually help improve the planning of our streets in the future?
Yeah. So the number one thing that I would point to is the street typology guide. And so that's definitely a new way of looking at a series of inputs, from traffic volume to adjacent land use to connections, roadway functional classification, and then trying to prioritize elements and modes. So thinking about bike network, updating the St. Louis bike plan would be included in that network layout of the typology design. But that's just something that we really haven't done before, and being able to open up design guidance like that, when a project or a street is up for some sort of planning or project deliverable, looking at that guidebook to help make some more informed decisions about what that street could look like.
Thanks, Jackie. Agree with everything Jackie said. Additionally, I think I would point to the work that East West Gateway is doing now on their safety action plan and high injury network, which is almost complete, and East West Gateway will probably adopt next month. It's completely usable as it is. The data analysis is very rigorous that they put together. And we can take what's already completed and go a little deeper on things like crash factors in the city or policies that are more pertinent to the city in terms of improving safety outcomes. And we can really use the high injury network. So these are the roadways that tend to be arterials, where we have the most injuries and the most fatalities, and are sometimes the hardest projects to get done because they tend to be more expensive. We can use that high injury network as a way to prioritize what roadways or what corridors in the future get investment. And there's more funding available today from the federal government and through programs that are administered by East West Gateway to prioritize safety. And while that is already a factor when the city is looking at projects, and if you look at the high injury network that they're producing, we already have many projects on those roadways, which is a good thing. I think it'll just become more clear what those priorities should be in the future and where we can make the most impact to improve safety with new infrastructure projects.
And that would improve our ability to apply for grants and other things too, wouldn't it? Having those kind of types of things ready to go.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's one new program, which is a federal program, the Safe Streets for All program, which is specifically for implementation of safety projects on the high injury network. But all of the existing transportation funding programs, which now have more money in most of them, safety can be a criteria. So it's not just that we can go after the federal implementation money. We can use the existing transportation programs as well, but just prioritize projects in these high injury areas.
I just want to be clear, because I know we have a lot of American Rescue Plan Act money right now. We know we're talking about the PAMS money, but this is something else. We're talking about the ability to plan and really get funding for things in the future after all of that extra money is gone.
Yeah, there will always be more we need to do in the future, and the data analysis that's been done, I think, will really help prioritize future projects.
And that's why I'm very excited about this, and I'm especially excited about the policy and ordinance review part of this. We all know that we can come up with plans until, the sun goes down, but it really helps to understand also the structures of our city and how we might better orient ourselves to achieve safer streets for everybody. And so I'm really looking forward to seeing the recommendations that come out of this committee. But as I understand it, these will be recommendations. It'll still be up to the Board of Aldermen to get some of that stuff done. Is that correct?
Yeah, yes and no. So some of those may be ordinances, and in that case, yes, it'll be, if we have recommendations, it would then go to the board to enact those things, or, to consider them before enacting. Some of them may be internal policies and programs that we assess and determine, are they meeting the goals? Have we set goals for them? Are they meeting the goals we set for them? Is there a way to reorganize them? And so we may be able to do some of that work in the course of the plan or as an outcome of the plan that is distinct from new ordinances as well.
Excellent. Well, again, I appreciate all the work being done on this. I'm really looking forward to what comes out of this, and we've got a lot of good people on this team. So thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thank you, Vice Chair Browning. I appreciate those questions. I have a few more. One of the things that you talked about with the typology guide and the design toolkit, is there anything that replaces in our current planning process that saves time, or is that more just like, here's a menu of things that could be done? I'm trying to understand, what that part delivers, really.
Yeah, so, well, the network, certainly laying out the typology design guide over a network is going to like, for example, I mentioned the Bike St. Louis plan, and this will be an update to the Bike St. Louis plan when we think about networks for routing bikes, but it won't be like design standards. So it will be more that menu of a more high-level look at the streets with that network overlaid, and then specific elements for prioritization or recommendations on that corridor, for example.
Which might inform then a study or a plan or design. Okay. I feel the network piece, I feel like there's two things being talked about. The high injury network, which these are all the places where people have been getting hurt, killed.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's also the connectivity network of how do we move people on alternate modes of transportation through the city. Do you imagine that a lot of times those things overlap in terms of the locations of them? And then with funding projects, do you see those as sort of two separate things the city's working on, or somehow combined into one larger network?
Yeah, great question. I think there's definitely overlap between them. So I'm spitballing a little bit here, but a project like the Compton Bridge replacement. So we already know that it's challenging to cross the rail yard and to cross, the highways from north to south, south to north. And so that would be an example of, you've got aging infrastructure, the need for a better multimodal connection or biped connection, that would be identified on a project like that. We need better facilities on that type of bridge. And then when you get to the funding availability to build the bridge, you would start there and say, we need to improve this bike ped connection on the bridge. I'm using that as an example because we're already doing that. Mm-hmm. But I think we're also going to identify desirable connections that we would like to see in the future. So this is also, this is conjecture, but maybe we want a better, connection between Fairgrounds Park and Fallon Park. Those parks are not that far apart. But there's not really like a super strong trail connection identified between those two places now. And that might be the type of thing that will be identified in the typology guide and this network planning.
Please.
Alderwoman Schweitzer, I just wanted to back up a little bit on the study question and corridors, if I could,
Sure.
Because that network could be overlaid with the typology guide, and then your follow-up, would that necessitate another study? Maybe not the way that we're doing corridor studies right now and doing a lot of detailed exercises around values and priorities. Those are what we're going to be establishing during the TMP process, then overlaying the network with the typology guide, you go out and you collect the data and you see what's going on, but maybe it's not as extensive as the way that we're currently doing corridor studies without this holistic plan.
And in terms of a design toolkit, a document came out with a lot of information about what kind of traffic calming things the city uses. Do you feel like it's different from we use bollards and bump outs versus design? I mean, is that just a completely different document?
Well, I think the main difference there is that the traffic calming guidance still really focuses on slowing down motor vehicles, which certainly makes a safer corridor for people walking and biking. But the street typology will focus on all modes of transportation and elements that go beyond basic safety and elevating comfort and user experience.
Awesome. The visioning workshop sounds very, very interesting. I know you said you're still working on compiling all of that, so I don't expect you to be able to say this is exactly what they want. But was there anything that really came out of that? Did everybody choose safety, or was it something where you could feel like this is something that we feel like we knew that we didn't know then, or any initial feedback you can share with us?
Yeah, so one thing that I found interesting, so we did the mission map, which was an individual activity, and then people shared at their group. And then we put the results in Mentimeter, so, it's a word cloud. We didn't get the numbers, we have all of them, but we didn't show them on the screen. The largest word was sustainability. And so most of the people in that room, or the highest number of people, equated their department's mission with sustainability. So we had representatives from the Streets Department, Planning and Urban Design, Office of the Disabled, BPS, yeah. I'm spacing on some of the other departments, but it was just interesting to see that was really high. But then to your point, safety was certainly a pretty high value for people in terms of prioritizing what we need to think about in our transportation system.
That's really interesting. I would not have expected sustainability to pop up, but it's heartening to hear that it did. We all know, how important that is as an aspect of how we use our roads. The piece that I'm interested in with going from there. So you said you were going to come up with some sort of report on that, or would that just be part of the TMP, or is that something we might see earlier?
So the output of that, we'll be summarizing it for some sort of internal report, not necessarily saying that full report would end up in the TMP, but then we'll be putting together the vision statement for the entire planning process and then setting up what those values are around transportation and mobility and infrastructure decision making, so that when the TMP is complete and the City of St. Louis is doing projects, we can look to the values that we've identified in the TMP as our guiding principles, and what values is this project accomplishing for that guiding planning document.
The point you made about a statistically relevant survey, I think, is really important and really interesting. And people need to be reached in all sorts of different ways. So you mentioned survey, several meetings this summer, and then next at spring, 2 different times. Are you planning more traditional in-person things? I mean, and also what can we do to be helpful with that, and just making sure that I had a conversation earlier about making sure that it's not just the same 20 people who are always coming and giving, and then we leave out all these other people. I guess I'd love to hear more about the strategy around that.
Yeah, so I love the question. People aren't coming to focus meetings around transportation projects that are different than the same 20 people like you're referencing, and the people that we really need to hear from. So within the scope of work, we do have 8 traditional workshops, dedicated to the TMP this summer and next spring. So kind of like an initial fact-finding, listening, here's what we've done to date, and then draft recommendations, your final plan completion. Within that time frame, we're scoped for about 60 different neighborhood meetings, pop-up demonstrations, tables at community events. And so we really want to hear from you, from other members of the community. where we should be, where we can reach the most people. So this summer we'll be doing about 40. So from June through September, 40 different unique opportunities to go out and meet people where they are, do some sort of like mini values exercise and give people the opportunity to take the survey. But yeah, our engagement strategy is certainly focused on going into the community and not necessarily asking people to come to us at a meeting format that's hard to get to, or a time that doesn't work for them, or they don't have childcare, or all of the other barriers that you normally think of.
I appreciate that. It sounds like you all will be everywhere, and I'll see you a lot. And my comments about the same 20 people coming weren't to disparage those 20 people. Those 20 people are amazing and have done so much. So if you're one of those 20 listeners, any other questions just to back up, or any public comment? We do.
I have two people for public comment.
I'll recognize Alderman Vollmer first. It looks like he wants to say something, and then we'll do public comment.
Well, I just want to know how many roundabouts will be. As we know, they're rebuilding the two down near Gravois about every other month because they drive right through them. So just consider that when you're doing your plan. Thank you.
That's a good question. Maintenance of what we put on the streets is definitely,
That was another theme from
Right.
the workshop,
the
maintenance.
Awesome. Alderman Velasquez, I didn't, are you have any questions? I didn't see you, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, it's all right. I want to just say thank you for the presentation, Scott and Jackie and team. It's really exciting. I'm sure I would love to engage with you. And of course, I know my ward is already engaged too in some of these conversations, but definitely want to plug in. I just want to understand, or I guess I have a question about the typology, which is really fascinating. Is there going to be in the, I don't even know how to say it, in the typology, will there be not quite a maintenance plan, will there be some kind of estimate to these kinds of roads need sort of, with this sort of level of, use, need maintenance on a regular basis? Will the typology include things like that?
Yeah, the typology toolkit will certainly include information about maintenance and operations, so that will be included. Janet's here, and she's leading the task, so there's been a lot of questions about that, and I just want to say anything specific to this while she's here.
Come on up. Thank you. Thanks for
Hello,
being
everyone. Oh, sorry.
Hi. No, thanks for being here. Thanks for answering questions.
Yeah, I'm Janet Atarian with Smith Group, part of the team. I guess to go back to some of those questions that you had earlier about the typology and how it helps with the process, right? So the typology is very tied to process, right? So it does a couple of things for us. It certainly names our streets, and it gives us a much broader set of names that help us focus on our more vulnerable users, in addition to cars and trucks and all those different things, right? And so that allows us to access and understand how, if I'm a project manager and I'm approaching a project, the typology map says, oh, hey, I know now that this project is on this type of street. When I'm on this type of street, here's the types of questions, the other tools maybe I'm going to look at, and the things to help me get that scope correct, whether I'm just resurfacing that project or I'm doing a full reconstruction, right? Because the type of projects and funding that might be approaching this plan could be very different. But we want every type of project to be looking at it from the complete streets perspective and looking at safety and understanding what are the tools I have given my project to impact this, and do I have to go back and have a conversation, maybe even about funding or something, to make sure we can address these things. So doing that very early on helps save the process, right? Because it's always bad when halfway through a project, everyone's like, why aren't we doing X, Y, and Z? And they're like, well, because I only have a budget of A, B, and C, right? If we've thought about that early on, we can figure that out when we're doing tips and CIPs and all that kind of good stuff. Second of all, by streamlining that, tying it to the process and the design guidelines, this should all make it much more should be easier for project managers and more consistent, right? And so that we are looking at those key filters like the highest injury network. Another piece of it too, as you mentioned, maintenance, tying this to not only the city's program of work, but all the others who do work in the right of way. So we don't rip up the road a year or two afterwards because we've got to do utility work, right? So it's a format in which we can start to have those types of coordination. So that's some of the ways it can help save both time and money, I think, in the process. So that was one thing I wanted to mention. And of course, that then ties back to the policy work, right? So how do you align this around policy that will help allow these things to come to be in a functional way? I think hopefully that addresses some of the topics that I heard earlier. Did I miss something?
Go ahead, Alderwoman Velasquez.
No, that was helpful for me. I just have like 1.5 more questions. I heard that the website launched today, but I did not write down the URL. Where can I find it?
tmp-stl.com.
All about the acronyms.
Okay. And then just sort of curious in this big plan, as you move forward. I mean, I think because of, as Mr. Ogilvie addressed, because there isn't a lack of a plan, I think you have a lot of de facto, ad hoc, amateur project engineers, including us sometimes, or traffic engineers. So is there going to be some I think it would be helpful if there's not already, like maybe as you build this out, a glossary and a menu, but also, I think an explanation of what tools are which, because I think people are, obviously traffic safety is the biggest concern. And, we get a lot of requests for speed humps, and it's like, well, I've heard of bump outs and, kind of just a list of things that may be traffic calming measures, but are not always accurate. And I think people are just looking for, a way to make it better. So is there going to be anything to kind of like help educate us as, policymakers, but also just the public on, I guess maybe the menu of options, but also kind of what things are and why they're used in certain ways?
Yeah, so during the process, specifically for all of these community events and everything that we mentioned, we're focused on educational materials and input activities. So I showed pictures of the project fact sheet. We acknowledge that's probably too technical to take to a lot of these community events. So we're using that as a starting point to put together this brochure. Like, for example, a typology design guide is something that a lot of people are probably not necessarily going to understand. So really distilling that down into information that we can educate and then also get feedback in the process.
Great, thank you. I don't have any other questions. Appreciate you all being here.
Thank you, Alderwoman. Anything else from members of the committee before we? Okay, Madam Clerk, we're ready to have public comment.
I have Taylor March.
Hi, Taylor, go ahead.
Hey, thanks again for letting me speak, and super excited to hear that the city is undertaking this and hear a little bit more detail about the plans as they shape up. So I just had a couple of comments / questions. One is there's a lot of talk about values and priorities within the TMP, and wanted to know whether or not the TMP or the city's updated sustainability plan would be making any goals or targets when it comes to mode share for the city of St. Louis moving forward. That's something I've seen in other communities that's been really effective, especially when aligned with funding of implementation on projects to kind of drive more pedestrian activity or biking activity within the city, especially as the city tries to attain different sustainability targets. The other comment that I had was a question about how deeply integrated MoDOT Transit or Metro Transit is going to be in on the typology creation, since they are, stand to benefit a lot from the different typologies, but also aren't in charge of the infrastructure. Just want to make sure that they're considered when it comes to, making sure that there's full sidewalk connections and really high class, high tier bus stop facilities on all of our major arterials through that typology creation.
Thank you, Taylor. Do we have any other public comment?
I have JL.
And I will, as if people do ask questions, I will write them down. It's in our committee meetings, we don't do a kind of public comment and then question and answer from the panelists. It's just opportunity for public comment, and then I will keep track of what people ask if they do have questions, and then ask it as part of the committee conversation. But go ahead on the next. Thank you.
Okay, JL,
Hi,
could you please turn your
yes,
camera
my
on?
name is my name is Joanne Lamb. I'm a board member at Paraquad and a member of SMART. I just had a quick question about whether there were plans to reach out to the special communities like SMART and Paraquad, Missouri School of the Blind, the Center for, what is it, Central Institute for the Deaf, to see if they have any input early on in the stage, so that way special needs focus can be directly brought in.
Thank you very much for that comment. And is that everyone who had signed up? Okay. Thank you for the folks who came in and gave comment and gave their opinion and asked questions. The questions that I wrote down, we can just go in order of what they were. The first information that we got from the public was wanting more information about the benchmarks and planning and the metrics, and how we'll see that information presented.
Yeah, so so in terms of benchmarks and sort of data and project sharing, I think we'll absolutely have, in the course of the plan, we'll be developing some public-facing tools that the city can use. I think there was a question about mode share as well. So mode share just means, like, what percentage of people are driving to work and taking the bus to work, et cetera. And some cities have set targets for those things in planning documents. I would say it's an open question. I think it's something to consider, although there are certainly times when, putting those goals on paper doesn't have a lot of effect in real life, but it's certainly something to be cognizant of, I think. And the question about coordination with external partner agencies, so we absolutely view this planning effort as a really key way to communicate to partner agencies, like, I think in particular MoDOT and Bi-State Metro Transit, what our priorities are, and how we can collaborate on roadway design so that the services, or the maintenance they're providing on city streets, we're working together to deliver a better product, essentially. And I think the dialogue with clearly we're incorporating, like, the big projects that Bi-State has, like the Green Line.
Mm-hmm.
There are other opportunities to, I think, coordinate on improvements to transit service throughout the city. So that's certainly part of it.
And then the other question was regarding connecting, and I did hear you talk about a focus group specifically with David Newberger, but connecting with the advocates for the disabled community and members of that community, and how that would work.
Yeah, that's a really important question to comment. So David Newberger, who runs the Office of the Disabled for the city, is on the core team for managing this project. And I think we're very cognizant of the fact that residents who have a disability or have a particular mobility challenge are often not engaged with. And we, I think, want to be very intentional about making sure that we hear the perspective of those groups. And so we're going to do that through focus groups, which we're already planning. I think that's also part of the reason why we're doing what we keep referring to as a statistically valid survey, so that we are really getting the real views of a representative demographic sample of the city of St. Louis. And, all of us, every one of us is going to experience a time in our lives when we can't drive. It is inevitable. So that is something that should really be, a core feature of a good city transportation plan, is a high degree of consideration for, all modes of mobility and accessibility.
Thank you. I appreciate those answers. As someone who takes the bus really regularly, I can tell you that there have been times where I've been very scared for my life just crossing Morgan Ford or coming up on Gravois. So thinking about how all road users interact with the roads is just such an important thing. Okay, any final questions before we close? Okay, well, I just want to say on behalf of myself and the Public Infrastructure and Utilities Committee, thank you for coming. We're so excited about this plan. We're so excited to be involved, and I hope that you come back. We weren't too scary. You come back and give updates as the plan progresses. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll move on with the agenda. Any written testimony?
There are none.
Any announcements? I have none. Excuse members, I would like to excuse Alderman Keys for necessary absence.
So noted.
And with that, I will accept a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Any call for previous roll?
Previous roll.
Hearing no objection, we are adjourned. Thank you.